Fries are done. Does anybody know that one? Ding, fries are done. Yeah. That's what I think of when I hear the ding. But that's not what we're supposed to be talking about today. So here we are, week 6. Due today was visual design for your webpage. Again, if you chose to use other colors and other background graphics, etc., than I did, and chose to kind of play around with the visual design and make it your own, I applaud you on that. Hopefully some of you got a chance to kind of explore a little bit of stuff like that. Today, what we are going to do is, the exercise that we're going to do is making your website into a multi-page website. The lecture that I have, this building an HTML proto-site using PHP, is kind of an older lecture out of another class of mine. The only thing that's really old about it is that this design isn't responsive. Other than that, the way the syntax of the code, the theories, the principles that we are going to be using are pretty much identical. So instead of writing up kind of a duplicate lecture, I just chose to point to this lecture. So if we then have a website that we want to have be a multi-page website, meaning that if we click on any one of these links, it takes us to another section of the site, and we have our submenu down over here on the left-hand side. And you can see that as we go through the site, the URL changes from, now this one is obviously tucked under my examples folder, in another folder, build an HTML proto-site using PHP. Right now, if I go back to the services page, it's labeled services.php. If I click on any one of these subpages like design, now it's services-design. And if you'll notice that when we are in some of these subpages or in any one of these sections, the navigation stays highlighted. So in terms of what navigation does, right, part of navigation is, or when we hear the term navigation, let's go to my navigation design lecture from another one of my classes. When we hear the term navigation, we may think to ourselves, oh, I'm going from here to there. I am finding my way, right? That's only part of navigation. In order to be able to find your way, you also need to accurately ascertain your position to begin with, right? So if we are navigating around, when it comes to then ascertaining our position, there may be different methodologies of ascertaining our position. The most common way that you may out there in the interwebs is if I just go to my business site, and if I go to my services page and then go to web design and development. The projector up here is kind of blown out again, but here is where, if I highlight that, here is where you would see what we call the breadcrumb navigation, okay? All of us are probably really familiar with that, especially when we're going through an e-commerce website. One of the other ones that we may or may not be familiar with is if then we are in a section, like we're on a subpage called design, under the section services is then to have the rollover state, right, stay highlighted like that, which is what I call the "you are here" state. I got that lingo or that terminology from Steve Krug's "Don't Make Me Think" book. Does anybody have that book at all? Right, that's pretty much one of the first web design books on web usability. So what we are going to do today then is we are going to build a multi-page site using the PHP extension. Okay, so and as well we are going to use then some conditional statements to say if we are on this page or under this section, keep this highlighted. Okay, so that's kind of the exercise that we're going to go through today. So if we go back to this lecture then, the first thing that we need to do is if we take a look at this, it's actually like a new tab. No, it's not any bigger. If we look at man, these projectors are really terrible, aren't they? Didn't know they were that bad. Are all the projectors like this? Or is this one just significantly bad? Are you guys used to that? Yeah? It's just blown out. It's really, really super high contrast. So again, the grays don't show up. And then, yeah, the text looks really kind of blurry. But whatever. So what we're going to do then is we are going to make a series of pages, right, that we are then going to have an about section. Now, we're not going to do any subpages. You can if you want down the road, but we're just going to work on the main pages where we're going to have about PHP, we're going to have contact, what are the other navigation items that we have so far. So we're going to have about, services, portfolio, contact, and what we are going to do then is we are also going to use a series of includes. So right here you can see that we have an includes folder, and in that folder I have footer.php, header.php, navigation.php, sidebar.php, titles.php. We're not going to use all those files, but we're going to use the principle of includes. In other words, has anybody ever, back in the day, I think, Anna, you used to use front page, you said way back? No? Didn't you used to use something? Is that you? Who used to use front page? No? Who's done web development way, way, way back in the olden days? Somebody in here did, I know. 70s? No, like in the late 90s, early 2000s. Well, okay. Well, if you've ever strung together a series of HTML pages, for example, if we, right, had this page, index.html, and if we now saved this as, and you don't have to do this, I'm just doing this as a demo, about.html, right? And because in the navigation area, I have the navigation for about, and it links to about.html. If I were to preview this, then right, and I rolled over about my about navigation item, you can see down in the bottom left-hand corner here where it says faculty Washington, about.html, right? If you are using Chrome, the target or the hyperlink that you're about to go to will show up down there. And so if I click on that, this page is in Latin. Did you guys know that? It wants me to translate. I don't want to translate. So if I went back to the home, oh, come on, stop showing this, kill me. So if I'm here at the index.html and I click on about.html and it keeps on, no, I don't want to translate this, okay? I could also then save this page as services.html fresh. Never translate Latin, right? And so if I clicked on services, this is what I mean by back in the day, right? You are saving a page as, right? And now if I want to then here for text, say services about home, right? I'm on the home page. I'm now going to the about page. I'm now at the services page, right? They're all based off of one another. The downfall is, what if then I wanted to change something in the navigation? For instance, if I'm on index.html and I decided that I wanted to put in a navigation called blog and send it to blog HTML. So if I go back to the index page, now I have that navigation item for blog, right? But if I go to the about page, the navigation item for blog is no longer there, okay? How many of you have experienced this? That's what I'm talking about by way back in the day, okay? So this is the way, if you're just using HTML and CSS to then string together a series of pages to then navigate through those pages, which is semi-practical, right? But where it has its downfalls is if any time I want to then change anything in any part of the page that is a duplicate part, in other words, I'm going to have the same navigation on every page, right? I'm probably going to have the head tag, similar things in the head tag on every page. Well, as I start editing one page, well, if I have 4 or 5 other pages, I have to make the same edit into those 4 or 5 other pages, which is extremely impractical, right? Is going to then cause errors or discrepancies or differences, whatever you want to call it. So if we then are doing this kind of a thing where then we have a set navigation like this, wouldn't it be practical to write that navigation one time? True? Right. So therefore then, if we go back to this lecture, you can see then that in this includes, right? This includes folder here. I then have a file just dedicated to navigation. I also have a file just dedicated to the header, one just dedicated to the footer. So what we're going to basically do is we are going to section the bits and pieces of these pages into kind of puzzle pieces, where we're going to have a header include, a footer include. So the header include is going to contain everything up in the top section, right? The footer include is going to contain things near the bottom, okay? Like we are going to have the same footer on each and every page. So what we're going to do then is start to, if we go to then my GitHub, 532, I'll just go to the finished last exercise, make your website responsive. If we have the index page here and I open that up, actually, I'm not going to open that one up. I'm going to open up the About page. If I open up the About page, this text right here that is on the page is the only unique portion, possibly as well the sidebar, depending on what's in the sidebar. But this portion of the code, the words and pictures, if you will, on that page are the only unique part to that page. So this is what I'm going to call then the page-specific content. Okay? You'll notice here that I have an include that digs into the includes folder and looks for header.php. Okay? If I go back here, then if I go into my includes folder and I go up to header.php, it has everything from the beginning doc type to the HTML, to the head, to the meta, title. Here is where we put the viewport in once we get into doing it responsive. We have an external, a link to an external style sheet. We have a link to another external style sheet when we get into, is that big enough on the screen? Let's bump it up a little bit more. We have another call to an external style sheet when we put our flex slider into the page. JavaScript that I believe I showed you when we first started this class. We have all the way through the closing head tag to the opening body tag to our header to the navigation, which is itself its own file, all the way through to the opening ID of content. And then it stops, right? Go back. We look at footer.php. Oops. Let's go look back at the About file again. And if we come down here to the bottom, it says includes footer. We go into the includes folder. We see footer.php. It picks up with the closing div tag for the content element, our footer, all the way through the closing HTML tag. So instead of having all those snippets of code written multiple times in each file all the way through our website, we can start sectioning those pieces off as if you were doing it in Dreamweaver, kind of WYSIWYG, they would call it library files, right? We call them in the web design industry include files, right? think of them as kind of puzzle pieces. And what do I mean by that? If I go to then this make your website responsive demo, and I click on the About page, meaning about.php is the file that's loading, okay? If I view source, it looks like it's just one complete HTML page from the beginning doc type all the way down to the closing HTML tag. But what's actually happening is the about.php file loads. And right away, it comes across a PHP script. What does PHP stand for? Does anybody remember? Personal homepage. The stupidest name in web design ever, right? But you can think of it as hypertext preprocessor, okay? Remember that PHP is a server-side language. So what is actually happening then is about.php is loading. The first instructions it gets is go and grab, using the include function, look for the programmers. What kind of a value is this? Starts with an S, ends with a string value, okay? So it's going to look for a string value that then tells it to look inside the includes folder for the file of header.php. So it's kind of putting these together as a puzzle piece, right? It goes and looks into the includes folder, gets the code for header.php, goes back, picks up here, loads all of this code, gets to the end, has another set of instructions and notice I'm saying another set of instructions, right? Another set of instructions that's using the include function to go look into the includes folder for footer.php. And it picks up with that div tag all the way through the ending HTML tag. And the result is, it looks like just one regular HTML page, right? So if you've ever gone to, let's just go to the page for the book, recommended text here, on Amazon, and you see this question mark right there, right? Does anybody remember what the question mark means? It's making a query to the server, okay? So it is making a query to the server for whatever it's making there with however they are writing their URL using whatever language and application. I don't recognize that, but it really doesn't matter. If I view page source, then I guess apparently I wait if I view page source. Eventually, you will see what is basically a page of code that's been compiled, right? So it's basically using include files, pulling things from the database, using conditional structures to say, if you're here, do this. If this is the case, do that, so on and so forth, to kind of put the puzzle together that then you see in the browser. So that's the same concept that we are going to use today. Okay, does that make sense? So let's get started. So I am then going to go and delete the files that I just made, because I just made those for demo purposes. Let me go to my remote server, 2017, services, about, edit, delete, yes, local server. And here's what I want to do. If I am going to start using this file index here as my template, right? Well, here's the deal. Index.html versus index.php. Did everybody notice that the files were now labeled, appended with .php? So here's the thing. When you are using PHP scripts in your website, using that server-side language, if you have your files appended .html, it won't work. Your browser, again, why? Well, it's just the way you do it. That's just the way things go, right? Your browser, when it wants to render PHP, it needs the .php extension to do so, okay? Now, there are cases where then you can change the URL structure using PHP, et cetera, like in WordPress, and I can show that to you later. But for right now, let's notice that index.html is actually missing, okay? So here's the thing. Remember that if you go to any website and it loads, for instance, if I go back to the root of my server here and I hit 2017, you're not actually seeing the file for index.html or a file for index.php or any kind of file, right? It just naturally goes and grabs either default or index or I think home used to work. I'm not sure. Typically, what I've seen is that PHP developers use the term index and ASP developers use the term default for some reason, right? But if I wrote in index.html, that's the file it's actually loading and looking for. If I had index.html and index. Both, two separate files, both on my server, which one would it load? I think so. I'm not 100% positive. Yeah, okay. I think .html will take precedent. Okay, so what we need to do is eventually delete our index.html file. For right now, though, we still want to keep this as intact as possible in case we screw up and need to go back and start over again. So what I've typically done is, if you notice here, template.html, which has everything in it. Now, I did make a link to an external style sheet. So we can do either or. We can do the external style sheet first or rename index as template. I'm going to say, let's go ahead and rename index.php or save as, save a copy, right? Let's leave index.html there for a while, but if we have it open like this, if we do a save as in our folder and we save it as template.html, right? And then I can go ahead and close index.html. And let me, totally forgot to get my script out. I've been improvising this whole time, as you guys are wondering. So either we can start with our external style sheet first or create the template file. I'm choosing to go ahead and save as and make the file template.html. But now, because we're going to have multiple pages, this is where we've done our work for doing our internal style sheet. So now, what we want to do then is take everything from inside. Don't copy the style tag. Copy what's inside the style tag. So if I select everything that is inside the opening to the closing style tag, and I cut, I say new CSS file if you're in Dreamweaver. And I just paste it in there. And I don't like that it indented everything over. So I'm going to select everything and hit Shift Tab to bring it back. Okay. And then I'm going to save this as styles.css right in the same directory or at the same level as my HTML files. Okay. So now, if I have template.html, right, and I have taken the style sheets or the styles out of template.html, what I need to do then is delete the style tag. And for good keeping myself organized, because I may have multiple style sheets, I like to block out my code like you've seen with the comments. In styles, and styles. I really want to make an AJ Styles joke, but I don't think any of you will get it. Did anybody get that? One person knows who AJ Styles is. Yeah. Yes, I watch wrestling. Don't judge me. I know. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to use a link tag. And in that link tag, I want to use the href attribute to then point to styles.css. Okay. I also want to use the rel attribute, which I'm guessing stands for relative, right? Or related. I'm not really, there are some things that I just take for granted. Rel, what's rel? I don't know. It's just what you put in there. And basically then you say style sheet. So in other words, I am linking to styles.css. I'm telling the browser that it is indeed a style sheet, right? And then I'm also using another attribute type, and I'm saying text CSS, right? Lastly, I'm going to say media, and I'm going to say all. And then I am going to close out styles tag, or the link tag, okay? So we may or may not need all of these. I'm pretty sure that if I deleted these attributes, that this would still work. But I'm always hesitant to, again, why do you do that? Well, it's just the practice that I've learned over the years, right? And I can tell you that this says it's a style sheet, this says it's a text file, that is a CSS file, and media, when I say all, right, I could say media oops, media a lot of them, print or screen are the two major ones that I typically use. I'm going to say all for both print and screen. So in other words, let me just kind of take a tangent here for a second. How many of you have printed out any of my lectures or my notes? Nobody. I'm not worried. I mean, I don't take it personal. I mean, I do take it personal, but I'll get over it, right? But if you did, let's say if you were a good student and that's what you did, to take notes, right? What you might find is that if you printed something from my page, right, like let's go to the lecture size for today, and if we say print, and we use the preview here, notice that it's only printing out just the content, right? It's not printing out the header or the navigation or etc. Have you ever printed out pages from a site and it prints out all the navigation and the headers and it looks really crappy versus some you print out, it's just text? Well, what's happening is if we looked at the style sheet for my school website and we went all the way down to the bottom, what I'm doing here is saying these styles right here are for the media of print. Okay, so I could divvy it up into two different external style sheets and say media screen for one and media print for another. But I typically just like to say media all and have that master style sheet. So this is why then grid, header, navigation, sidebar, comments box, display none. That's why those don't print out, right? When you guys print out my lectures to take notes. It's okay. I'm not going to cry myself to sleep. I just won't do it. So now that we have done this, and don't forget to, if I save them, they should both get kicked up to the web. But now that I have template and styles, right, if I sent those up, template.html, right? Yay, looks like it always has, right? Nothing has really changed, right? But again, I am now accessing template.html, okay? So if I view page source, right, we can see that it links to the external style sheet. And if I clicked on that, right, I basically see my whole style sheet here. Now, again, make sure that in this external style sheet, you do not have a style tag. That's one of the main errors that students make, is they copy everything, you know, style tag included, and put that in your style sheet. You do not need your style tag in there. If you put it in there, I think it causes errors. I can't remember, right? It did? Okay. All right, so now moving on. I am going to leave my index.html file there for now. But now that I have template.html, right, I can start making all my other files. So let's just go through and start making them. So I can save this now as index, and again, I want to use the extension PHP because we are going to be using PHP, okay? So now if I do that, here it is, and now I am working on index.php. And what I want to do now is, right, instead of going and making, in other words, if we go back to this lecture right here, instead of going and making all of our other files about services, portfolio, all the other navigation items that we have, we should first break this out into the include files, right? So again, if we are going to be saving our template now, right, as a file that is continuing to be a template, index, then we're going to save that as about, and so on and so forth. At this point in time, we want to make our include files, okay? So here we've created the external style sheets, creating the PHP includes. Again, this is the lecture from my Web 200 class. And if we see here, include. So this is include. Well, let's say it like this. This is the website for PHP, where if you want to look up anything PHP, what the functions are, what they do, etc., this is the documentation for you. So the include statement, right, includes and evaluates the specified file. So you've heard me refer to this already as a function. Okay, functions, methods, statements, etc., right? Sometimes the lingo gets a little bit fuzzy, but let's say that I want to differentiate between two different types of functions. One is the PHP written, or whatever code you're using, right? In other words, what other languages, like C, right? C#? So what are some of the pre-formatted functions, like the C# labeled functions or C# written functions? Isn't print one of them?
Yeah, like
okay. Right. So they do certain things according to the language, right? And when we see them in action in code, they are typically color-coded one way, right? Versus there is another type of function in languages, I'm assuming same thing in C#, a user-defined, correct? Okay, so if I then go to, for example, here in my student website, and I go to my theme here, and then I look at my functions.php file, Here is, for instance, a function called getMyTitleTag that is a user-defined function, and it has the keyword of function to label it as such. So I can then write conditional statements within this function, and if and when the browser comes across a PHP script tag that says getMyTitleTag, and then has the parentheses operators like that, this is then accessing the user-defined function for getMyTitleTag. Does that make sense? May or may not completely make sense to you, but just know that there are two types: language-defined, user-defined, right? So we are then going to come back here, and we want to then grab, I'm going to grab everything all the way through my opening div ID content. And what I want to do then is cut new file. I'm just going to say PHP, and it's going to do something stupid that I don't want it to do. Where it's going to give me this stuff. And I'm going to delete that. And I am going to paste everything from the doc type all the way through div ID content. Why all the way through div ID content? Remember what I was saying earlier, right? We want to, the goal is to only write snippets of code once, right? Now, I could have gone all the way through to there if I chose. However, there comes a time where maybe on a specific page, I want to give a certain class to div ID text, right? That could also, that argument might be made for div ID content, right? But for what we're doing, in other words, what you have to decide is, what are the blocks of code that I want to use as those puzzle pieces, right? And just over time, as you get more experienced with this, you'll be able to judge that a little bit better. For now, this is a pretty rudimentary, typical scenario where the first puzzle piece that I want to make as an include file is everything from the doc type all the way down to div ID content. And later on, we are then going to further this and rip out this navigation. But for right now, let's just use this chunk of code, okay? We are going to save this then as, now, name it header.php, but to keep ourselves organized, right? If you're doing this style of work, meaning you are just using light PHP to make a modular website of the nature that we are doing here, it's typical then to make an includes folder. I'll go ahead and make an includes folder, create, and save header.php in that includes folder, and save. So what you should have then is, here in the site manager, you see index.php as the root file that if it loaded, we would go and access. We then want to call the puzzle piece of header.php and store our other include files in that folder as well. It's just a way of kind of segregating our files into manageable chunks. In other words, how many of you have ever had all types of different files in one folder and searching for a file through your folder kind of was cumbersome because it wasn't organized very well, right? If I looked at everybody's desktop, how many files would I find on your desktop? I got one smile that's saying, don't you dare look at my desktop. Okay, right? My wife, sorry, sweetie, I'm talking about you in class, don't watch this video. My wife, her desktop has files all over it. To me, that just, oh my God, I can't, my OCD, I can't handle it, right? I just can't handle it. So anyway, long and short of it is, I'm gonna put my header include into my includes folder, and then I am going to freak myself out by having the projector go out. If you're watching this on video, you didn't see that. But I'm going to go back to index.php. And up top here is where I want to type out an opening PHP tag. So the syntax then is opening caret, question mark, PHP, and our closing tag. Inside then, we want to use the include function that we want to use a string value to call a path, okay? So we are going to use then, instead of like we do here, right? In our HTML, we typically use double quotes. Up here for this function, I am going to use single quotes. Does anybody know why? Yes, exactly. So if I go to here, my function file, let me then find a section here where I'm saying function, get my main menu, echo, right? Well, this function called echo right there in PHP is a function, pre-written language specific function that basically then will write something to the page, meaning echo div ID nav, echo h4 ID nav title, menu, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where in that function, I'm starting off then by writing HTML to the screen. Okay, they're bowling again upstairs. Does anybody know another function in PHP that will do a similar thing? Print. So you may come across the print function as well, okay? So what's happening here then is the syntax that I'm using is I'm using a PHP written function to call a string value. In that string value, or to call a string value, the syntax that I'm using is to use single quotes. So inside then, div ID double quote nav. So if I used double quotes here, that would open and this one would close. This one would open and that one would close. So in terms of keeping this as a separate value away from then this one, it's typical that in programming then for these types of languages, do you use single quotes in C#? No? Double?
I do.
Really? Well, you're probably not writing HTML. Yeah, okay. So when we have HTML like this, right, we want to differentiate double quotes away from single quotes. So the syntax that we typically use then in the PHP world is single quotes to call our string values. Did that make sense? Ish? Okay. So what we want to do then is go back here, and the string value that we want to call is to our includes folder. In other words, if I have index.php right here, in terms of file management, I want to go into the includes folder to call header.php. So therefore, then, I want to use the include function to go into the includes folder to call header.php. All right, moving on. Let's go down to the bottom then, and just like we in our header include started from the doc type all the way through our opening div ID content, we want to do something similar now where we go to the end of our div ID content all the way through the HTML tag. Same thing, cut, new file, you can say PHP. It will start out a new document in Dreamweaver that we do not need all the tags and whatnot. Let's delete that, paste in our closing div tag, and it's moved over a bit. I'm going to have to do that.
That stuff about the footer in the end from your
from index.php. Because again, what we did is we go back to template.html on it. Take a look at it up here, right? Template.html is still completely intact in case we ever need to go back to it again. It is a file that's just sitting there on our server saying, I'm a template. If you ever need me, I'm here, right? Which we then turned into our index.php file, where now we're then taking our index.php file, breaking it apart, and then we'll save that as the other files. Does that make sense? Ish? Okay. So I've then got the code for my footer. I'm going to save this as, who can guess? Footer.php. You guys are smart. All of you guessed that, right? And I'm going to save it in my includes folder. So now I have header, I have footer in my includes folder, and if I go back to index.php, same thing. I want to come down here, open up a PHP script, close the PHP script, go back in here, say include, use the include function. I want to call a string, and that string that I want to call is a path to includes / footer.php. And if I save this now, and I go to, let's just make sure, let's do this. I don't know if you guys know this function in Dreamweaver. If I'm hovering over my 2017 folder and I right click, I can say synchronize. And I can say selected files, get and put newer files. I want to just put newer files to remote. I don't want to delete any files not there yet, right? But this will then double check no synchronization is necessary. So it's put all my newer files to the server. Just double check. So if I go here and I close some of my windows, and I'm in 2017, and I go back to now the root of it, which file do you think it's called? Index.html or index.php? If we view source, it is index.html. I can tell because it still has the internal style sheet, right? If I go to index.php, it looks pretty much identical. If I view page source, though, it's got my external style sheet. Include header, you don't see include footer, but what's happening is index.php gets called from the server, right? If we look at index.php, then it starts out with, hey, instructions, right? So again, that old cliche, what is programming? It's a set of instructions. When I first heard that, I thought to myself, that can't be. It just can't be, man. It's a set of instructions. Yes, you have to tell the machine what to do for every single context, right? So once I really understood, oh, that is programming, right? No wonder programs are so long, are so heavy, because you have to go through and write instructions for every case, for every whatever, right? If you hit this XY coordinate, blow this thing up, etc., right? So our first instruction is use the include function to go get header, load that code, load this code, then go get footer and load that. Make sense? So let's start differentiating things. Right now, I have written home, header level 2, okay? So if, and that's legacy from my little test, okay? So if I load this now, it's telling me I'm on the home page. Let's also, do we need to shift this one over here? Let's do that as well. Now, we could make one file for a sidebar as well, meaning, let's take a look at the sidebar file that's in this demo. In other words, down the road, if we have these sections of pages, about, services, work, blog, contact, right? And services has these subpages, the about section has these subpages, the work section has these subpages. I could get away with making one include file to write all those out. So let me briefly show it to you. Oops. Link to the code here. So if I went in my includes file here and I looked at sidebar.php, here's what the sidebar looks like. Okay, so I could theoretically use if page is not the index file, right? write the sub-navigation head. If the page is this, write these items. If the page is this, write these items, so on and so forth. We're going to do that down the road in a very much lighter syntax, right? But for now, we are just going to leave our sidebar where it is and just say home page headline to basically say what page we're on. Okay, I do that. I go back here, I refresh, right? Home, home. Now we need to make about, services, portfolio, blog, and contact. With index here. Actually, yeah, I have, yeah, I'll just do blog. That was one I added. You don't have to do blog. You can do however many pages you want to, right? But I want to then save this as about.php so that come on, did it show up? There it is. Took a while. About.php. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go back to index and I'm going to get rid of my image, my face image, because I only want that on the about page. But on the about page now, I am going to change this to about. I'm going to go down to the sidebar and change this to about. So that if I go here now to the home page and I click on about, oh, what happened? Remember when we open our header up, remember when we put dummy links in here, right? We used about.html, services.html, portfolio.html, blog.html, so on and so forth. Did anybody do that with me? Right? We now have to change all of these to PHP. 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 And don't forget our link on our logo as well, right? So if we do that, and we go back and we reload our index file, and now we go to about in the about.php file, okay? So now I can go back to my index.php. Now that I have about saved, and I can save it as yeah, because basically any file, right? So let's look at it from the GitHub, the code that's already done, right? Whoops. So if we are looking at any one of these files, index, about, so on and so forth, anytime one of those files loads, we want to call the include to the header file, right? So again, however many pages we have on our website, 4, 5, 6, whatever, we're basically calling the same puzzle piece. Does that make sense, Mona? Okay. But because I have my about file that has the image in it, and I don't want the image on all the other pages, and then I deleted it from the image from my index file, I'm just going back to my index file to save as now services.php. And again, I am going to go up here and say services. I'm going to go down to the sidebar, say services. You're noticing a pattern here, hopefully, right? Because all I want to do is, now that I've saved each one of these, if we go back to the home page, right, as I click through these, because I've got dummy text in here that I'm working from our old template, I just need some way, some visual cue, some word cue that does actually show me, yes, you are going to a different page, right? And then here is where, well, if you want to edit this text now to talk about your services or your portfolio or whatever, again, we're just kind of setting you up with a basic HTML shell of a website that then you can go and populate. You can use if you want to or not, you know, but at least you know how it works so far, okay? Next one I want to do is portfolio. So now that I'm on services and it doesn't have that image, I'm just going to save this as portfolio. Again, you're noticing a pattern, what I'm doing. Portfolio. Portfolio. Save this one as blog. Blog. And lastly, contact, which we will be doing a contact form next week. Contact. So now with all that saved, right, I have now my nice little set of files about blog, contact, index, HTML, index PHP, portfolio, services, right, that go and grab the includes for footer and header. So now I feel confident that I can get rid of index.html. So I am going to go and delete index.html locally. And also, I'm going to go up here to remote server, right, and see that it still exists on my remote server. So again, if I hit this button, expand to show local and remotes, I would see that it's still there on my remote. I'm going to delete that. Yes, I really want to delete that. So now if I went back to the root of my 2017, no longer are index.html and index.php duking it out, and index.html wins. Now I just have index.php. And again, you don't see the URL because it's just loading the file, not showing you the file that it's loaded, right? But if I were to navigate through the website now about services, portfolio, That's not how you spell portfolio, is it? Number one error, spelling mistakes. You've all done it too. I know you have. Portfolio, blog, contact. I can't spell. Now what I can do is, because I relabeled that, and if I now have on the server contact spelled correctly and contact spelled incorrectly, I can synchronize, put newer files to remote, and delete remote files not on local. So it's going to put contact in header and delete contact. Yes. Go back. Refresh. Contact. Yay! Now I have a multi-page website. So now what we want to do is, anytime we're on one of these pages, I want then stay yellow. Okay. Let's start out by going to our, let's actually close some of these files. And file. And this is where I could just go ahead and start editing in here, right? If I wanted to. However, I am going to be using a variable. Has anybody ever heard the term of variable scope? Yeah? Okay. Where if you use a variable in one page, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be picked up by another page, right? That'll get, if you start writing functions down the road, let me say it like this. If we go to my functions file here, right? This variable called post. If I am writing a function and I use a variable like main page, how many of you know what a variable is? Okay. A variable is a way of, I'll just in layman's terms, say storing information in a keyword. In other words, main underscore page is equal, not is equal to, get post meta, post ID, navigation true is equal to main, right? So that variable has a value. The value is a series of a function that has arguments passed through it that compares itself to a string value. Don't worry about that. Just know that this variable, $main page, equals something. Okay? So it's basically like saying shorthand, right? Putting a label on something and then using that label Oh, there it is. If it is main page or child of main page, then do these things. So basically, if it is main page, meaning get post meta, post ID navigation set to true is equal to main, then write out echo div ID subnav, etc. Right? That's your basic programming right there. So we need to do this. If we go to our includes files, first we are going to separate something into its own include file because we are going to be using a variable, right? And we want that variable to be specific just to what we are doing here, okay? So I'm going to go select my navigation, cut, new, create PHP, select all, and paste. Move it back over. And I'm going to save this as navigation.php. I'm going to save it in my includes folder. Okay. And then I have to go back to header PHP because I'm basically taking one puzzle piece, cutting another piece out of it, and I have to then access it, right? So what am I going to write here? Correct.
Not navigation context in the CSS.
I took the navigation stuff out of the header include file that we had made. HTML code out of there. Includes navigation.php, right? So again, if this is my header file, right? Just like if I were on my index file, right? I want to call that puzzle piece, right? Now, even though we are in the header file calling that puzzle piece, why am I still saying includes? In other words, I'm here in header trying to call navigation. Why don't I just do this and get rid of the call to that folder? Well, when this is actually loading into the browser, it's loading at the root of the folder, right? When it's doing the server-side stuff. So therefore, I have to go dig back into the includes folder. And if I've done this correctly, here, and hit refresh, and say, yay, nothing happened. Okay? So here's what I want to do. Let's take a look at the syntax. I need to first set up a variable. I'm going to call it page. We are then going to use the base name function to call server script name. I'll save you the long and the short of what's actually happening. But basically, we're saying page. So if we go back to this lecture here, if I search for come on, find, it's not working. Well, huh. Maybe I don't have the, yeah, there it is. The base name function. So the base name function will return some type of component of the path, right? The name of a component of the path. So basically what we want to do is, if I'm, let's say, on my services page, I want to say, if I'm on services.php, do something. Show me, make this highlighted, right? So again, that's programming. So we are going to use if something statement. If A is greater than B, print out or echo A is bigger than B. That's the cornerstone of programming. If Gus goes past the telephone pole, he loses his bike. Let's just say, right? That's my child. Right? We can also use an else, right? So we can say, if condition is true, do something. Else, if it's not true, do something else, right? We are basically going to say, in our list item for our menu items, if the page is equal to, now, up here, we have one equal sign. Here, we have two equal sign. This says page equals base name, etc. This is a comparison. If the page double equal sign is equal to about.php, echo the class of current into this list item. Okay, so therefore, how this is working is if I inspect this, if the page is equal to about.php, this list item that contains the text about with the link to about.php, and that list item then apply a class of current. So that when we are on A for the list item with the class of current is yellow or gold. Does everybody see that? Same thing. If I go to services, now, if we're on services, the services page has the class of current. Does that make sense? In theory? Let's go write it. So here in our navigation PHP, we need to open up PHP script tag, close it. I'm going to say a variable of page equals, and this is where then in the PHP world, if we are signifying a variable, we signify that with the dollar sign. Okay. How about in JavaScript? Anybody know? VAR. Var. What is it in C#? To signify a variable. Okay. So in different languages, they have different ways of calling variables and using variables. In PHP, right? If we're using variables like main page, we can then call it here. You can see a whole list of variables, the post variable, right? So on and so forth. Post variable is the most popular one. So what we need to do then is go back here and say, what is page equal? That's again where we're going to use the base name function. And as the argument, right, we are going to use the super global PHP server script name, right? Yeah, base name. We are going to use what is called a super global server, and we are going to pass the value. So the brackets, the parentheses, are where you store arguments or pass arguments through functions. The brackets, can anybody tell me what the brackets mean? Array. Exactly. So you're pulling something out of an array. Server, base name, server, not script file name. Base name, server, script name. And then if you're going to pass it as a value out of an array, key value pair out of an array, right, the value, you're going to use the quotation, single quotations. Lastly then, because this is then basically a statement, right, I need to use the semicolon to end the statement, which I just realized that possibly I'm going to have to go through all of these real quick. Index.php, about, I should have used a semicolon at the end there. You won't get an error, but if you're using a debugger, it'll tell you, it'll scream at you. So, I knew I was forgetting something. It's been a long couple weeks, if you know what I'm saying. And services. I often forget the semicolon on this one because I forget that this is a statement, even though it's not wrapped in some kind of a conditional statement. So services window, portfolio, contact, blog, about, index, header, same thing there. All right. Now I'm back on the, right? So basically now what I want to do is I want to check to see if we're on a page. And if we're on a page, write the class of current into the list item. So here's where you might hopefully not get confused. Do yourself a favor and make sure you have enough space. We are writing a script inside the opening list item tag because basically we want to use the attribute of class with a value of current if we're on a certain page, right? You're noticing a pattern here. Opening PHP script tag. Closing PHP script tag. Let's go back in here and use the conditional if. Oops. Use then the parentheses brackets, parentheses operators, excuse me. So if I go back to here, right? If, in parentheses, I have to lay out some kind of a condition, okay? Page. Again, I want to use double equals, which basically says is equal to. I'm going to use then the single quotations, and I'm going to say about.php. Okay? So I'm basically making a comparison or conditional if the condition is we're on the about.php. Then we have to say, and this is where there are different styles of giving a statement. But if we go back to here, the conditional stuff, you can see up here that parentheses operators echo. Oh, look, dude sent a photo. Dude is one of my students. Notice there are no curly braces here. I don't like that methodology. Bugs me. I will use either this methodology, the colon, and write some code, pick it up again, or this style. If, whatever condition, opening curly bracket, some kind of statement, closing curly bracket. If page is equal to about.php, Opening and closing curly brace. Echo. Class equals current. Semicolon. Closing PHP tag. So, again, using conditional, saying if the page is equal to about, echo classic current. And again, using the principle of escapement like you were talking, right? Opening with a single quotation, closing with a single quotation. In there, we're writing HTML, right, as a string value. Class is equal to, or class equals current. So let's see what happened. Save that. I'm going to go to the About page. I'm going to inspect that list item. Sure enough, we're on the about.php page, and it has list item class equals current. So we did it correctly. Why is this not gold? What? We haven't defined what current is in our CSS. You guys must be masters degree students. Correct. So what we need to do then is go to our style sheet. Navigation, UL, LI, A hover, gold. I want to say navigation, UL, LI, dot, current. Hope to spell it correctly. Current, A. Color, bold, which is, I want to use this C799, etc. Save. So basically, because I wrote a classic current in the list item, I'm saying using contextual selector li dot current, then the A tag, right? So the A tag inside a list item that has a classic current in the UL that's inside the navigation ID. I refresh. What did I do? Classic current navigation. Shouldn't be. Cache, maybe. I've noticed the cache has been getting stuck in Chrome a lot. is the cache. Notice that in Chrome at all? You guys probably haven't. You have? The cache keeps on getting stuck. Well, at least you learned about the cache getting stuck. And if something doesn't work, empty your cache. So now, basically what we can do is, here in our navigation, this once, I'm going to copy it, and go and paste it in all of my list items, and then change for each page, right? Services, if the page is portfolio, if the page is blog, if the page is contacts, and I should be able to go back, and now every time I go through and I'm on one of those pages, I should have my "you are here" state, and you should see then the class of current in each list item. Damn, 3 minutes to spare. That was timed pretty well. Jazz hands. In other words, we're done. How many of you got it all? How many of you have to go back and do stuff? Okay. It's getting a little more complex as we get along, isn't it? It's a good thing this is on tape, right? So here's what I'm gonna do. Again, we're done for the week for this exercise. I have, a set of code that I have now modified. And here's what I'm gonna do. The exercise today was multiple pages for your website. I'm going to go to my GitHub. And it's telling me that under HCDE532, all this stuff has changed. I'm going to comment multiple pages for your website. I'm going to commit and sync to master. And if I go back to the HCDE532 GitHub, under the 2714, multiple pages for your website. So let's go check navigation.php. It's all there, so you can go and check your code, right? Just like I said, do yourself the favor, don't copy and paste my code ever, right? But if you write something out once, then, like I said, there's no reason why you can't just copy and paste that snippet of code into, if you're just going to reuse it and rename stuff, or type it out by hand if you want to. More practice makes more perfect, I suppose. Google Hangouts. I think, right? Hi, Paula. Bye, Paula.